And let's start seated. Something comfy. Something that feels supportive to the spine. And just let that be the guide. Just needs to be supportive of the spine. And from that support, maybe the eyes close, maybe they don't, but we certainly settle into some cycle of breath. As the seconds kind of roll by here, make sure you're tweaking and adjusting the torso positioning so that you feel fully supported. We'll give ourselves 60 more seconds here. When you're right, when you're ready, let's allow the eyes to open if they're closed. Bring the hands likely going to be best served palms down somewhere on the legs. And we're going to do some torso circles. So big, full rotations of the torso, maybe playing into some of that lateral length that we found last week or yesterday. And really just thinking about exploring the spine's capacity to rotate here. And one more full circle in this direction, really getting into that. We'll come back to a full stop. Adjust so that you feel as normalized as possible. And let's go the opposite direction. So we get that big rotation of the spine. Direction 2, again, searching for potential of lateral expansion, but certainly all range capacity of the spinal column. And maybe even noting what feels sticky and where time or expansion might feel really good. Maybe one more full circle of completion. And eventually back to this big, tall spine. Let's extend both arms straight up and overhead. Interlace the fingers and palms down or palms up, whatever feels best for you. Let's just reach the arm straight up, thinking about maintaining the relationship to the bicep and the ear. Really helps to get that verticalness extending out from the shoulders if the bicep and the ear are in a nice proximity to one another. And let's just take this straight into a fold. So thinking about that length you created with that vertical reach and trying to take that now into some horizontal depth. Depending on kind of where you settle, you may be expanding by relaxing the shoulders or expanding by relaxing the subscapular musculature right in along the spinal column to get that extra, find a little bit of depth, right? So if we're kickstand, we just relax into the shoulders. If forehead is on the floor, think about that shoulder blade softness and using that shoulder blade softness for that little bit of extra depth. And then let's walk ourselves up back into seat, and we'll transition to a hands and knees tabletop. Setting the foundation of your tabletop, curling the toes. Let's lift the seat and roll back into a down dog. And you almost here are wanting to make sure that the space you soften, whether it's your shoulders or that medial line of the scapula, are engaged, because that will likely be the weak point in the depth of this shape. And then eventually we're going to come down to hands and knees. Slide your left leg straight back, toe down, and ground the shin. And then we're going to sink back into this asymmetrical version of child's pose. Now, there's a little bit of a hinge here, right? Is the right knee and the left knee have that displacement? The right hip's going to want to bow out and the right glute's going to want to push up. Think about just going back here, straight back, almost so that you feel the shape most intently along the left lateral edge of your body. It's using that anterior flexion on the left hip to get into the oblique and supportive oblique musculature. And then we'll pull right back and lift ourselves up into a traditional tabletop, sway the hips a little bit. And then we're going to take the same thing on the second side. Right leg extends back, the top of the feet presses down, the shin presses down, and then tailbone goes straight back. So it's an asymmetrical modified child's pose. You don't get the same depth because you can't get into the full flexion of the hip, of either hip. And then when you feel balance left to right, we're going to pull ourselves back to hands and knees tabletop. Curl the toes, lift the seat, and roll back. Try to use both the anterior hip space and the lateral edge space to get some length. And really drive back into your down dog, and then let's walk to the front of the mat. We'll eventually find our way to fold. Inhale, half lift. And extend, extend, extend through the top of the head until maybe again you feel that lateral edge expansion. If not, most likely sensation place is the lumbar musculature. And we'll release back into our fold, thinking about length from those two spots of sensation. Then drift your awareness to your sacrum, and let's roll ourselves up vertebrae by vertebrae, working up into our mountain pose. From mountain, hands coming together at heart center, really thinking about the softness of the breath here, the exchange on the inhale and the exhale. And then hug those arches up so the feet are super active. And we're just going to glide back like to the edge of chair. So you get into chair, right? But you're not really pushing the boundary of your depth. So we can just start to feel this mid-body neutrality and then extend the arms straight out in front of you. And then just rise straight back up. Hands reach up and overhead. This big length along the interior of the torso. And then all the way through forward fold. Inhale into half lift. Get that big full expansion into half lift. Exhale back into your fold. We'll plant the hands, walk ourselves back into plank. And from plank, we're going to gently, sweetly, and delicately lower ourselves down to our belly. So we come onto our belly. Let's take the hands right where they are, so they stay right underneath the shoulders. And elbows come in, nice traditional setup here. Quads are flexed, kneecaps are lifted, so we have that good strength in the legs. Lift the forehead maybe 1/4 inch off the mat. And then think about taking the right shoulder up towards the right corner of the mat. And then reverse that. So right shoulder comes back to neutral, it doesn't drop down, and left shoulder reaches up. And we're going to do that a couple more times. So just alternating that shoulder blade lift and trying to do it without pulling the opposite shoulder down towards the glutes. And then when you feel like you've had enough of that, let's relax and find crocodile pose. And we'll just breathe into that space. Just a nice, easy, fluid breath here. So there is this ashram out in the middle of this jungle. And that's not necessarily remarkably unusual. But the thing that made this ashram unusual and remarkably unusual is that inside the jungle, they had created a perfectly manicured English garden, complete with like bent grass lawns and Roman chamomile courtyards, just all of this, the things that we would imagine castle-side in Britain. They had created that level of garden in the jungle. We're going to give ourselves 20 more seconds here. Just trying to settle in and relax the shoulder structure, probably most particularly at the end of this little recharge. And then we'll slide the hands back underneath the shoulders, press ourselves up to hands and knees tabletop. And from hands and knees tabletop, let's once again curl the toes, lift the seat, roll our way back into down dog. And slide the right foot straight forward into lunge. Sweep both arms up into crescent. Settling into the verticalness of the torso. Good, strong engagement, middle of the body. Floating the hands back down to the mat. Grounding the left heel, bringing the right hand to the medial edge, big toe edge of that right foot, and opening your left hand up into this wide version of side angle. Left hand comes down, left heel comes up, right foot slides back to down dog. Find your balance, get the depth of the shape, then the left foot slides straight forward. We sweep up into crescent. Just that big vertical lift. We feel the middle of the body kind of actively responding and providing stability here. And then delicately, we'll float those hands back down to the mat. The right heel will ground. The left hand will come to the medial edge, big toe edge of the left foot. We'll take that right hand straight up into side angle and really think about the width here. Huge shoulder girdle. Eventually, right hand comes down, right heel comes up, left hand returns to its side, left foot steps back into down dog. Give yourself that moment of depth and appreciation as you come back into a balanced, neutral spine. And then we'll walk our way forward to the front of the mat. Inhaling into half lift. Get the spine as long as you can get it. Get the top of the head as far away from the hips as you can get it. And then relax back into fold and just encapsulate that depth into that fold. Awareness drifts to the sacrum. We'll roll ourselves up vertebrae by vertebrae, coming all the way back up and into our top space. Hands come together at heart center. Lock in the core, lock in the arches of the feet, or activate the feet as much as we can. Let's sink back into a chair. And then let's rise right back up. Sweep the arms up and overhead. We're going to half fold here. So folding so that the palms are facing towards the floor, extending the head out away from us. Exhale all the way into that fold. Slide your left foot straight back into lunge. And then when you land in your lunge, wiggle your left foot back another quarter to a half an inch. Ground your left heel and let your left hand take you into this super wide version of 2. And we have this nice vertical line right in the middle of the body. That big T out into the width that we created with our side angle. And then we're taking this medial width from that extra little bit of space, making sure that the lateral edge of that right thigh is staying peeled open and strong. Now let's come up onto the toe print of that front foot without losing the positioning of the torso. And then ground the heel, spin the left heel up. Feel all of that left anterior hip space. Float the hands down on the mat, step the left foot back into fold. Inhale into half lift. Oof. Exhale back into fold. Settle into that fold. Feel how much openness we have in the front of the left hip here. And really try to match that with the right side. And then we'll slide the right foot straight back into lunge. When you land in your lunge, wiggle back for that extra quarter to half inch. And then ground the right heel. Right hand takes us up into this super wide version of 2. And we really think about settling the shape first, right? We have the strength of the front quad. We have that lateral edge activation. We're feeling the medial line, that groin space opening. And then the shoulders are getting that same kind of level of engagement from the arms. Then we come up onto the toe mound, toe prints. And that really helps open up that medial line on the back leg, that right groin. Eventually, the left heel comes back down. The right heel spins up. Now we have all this super space. Float the hands down to the mat. Step the right foot back into fold. Inhale into half lift. Take the space. Exhale back into fold. Plant your hands. Walk into down dog. As you get back into the down dog, think about the hip creases and think about pulling those up as high as you can get them, really. Like the hip creases are where all the space of the shape is coming from. And then let's come down to hands and knees. Tabletop, flip the tops of the feet, and we'll find that hip crease depth in child's pose. As we settle in here. And so if you've ever kept an English garden, you know that even in the best of conditions, it requires constant maintenance, constant pruning, constant upkeep. And needless to say, the jungle was not an ideal space for an English garden. The ashram members were constantly reminded that if they weren't continually pruning, continually maintaining each path, each plant, each root, that the chaos of the jungle would very quickly take over. Let's give ourselves just 15 more seconds here. When you're right, When you're ready, we're going to pull ourselves forward to hands and knees tabletop. From hands and knees tabletop, let's see how tricky we want to get here. Let's do this. Let's take our right foot, cross it over our left, so we end up with the left leg relatively normal and the right leg extended and pressing back to that left side of the mat. And then we're just going to lift up into this little crossed, asymmetrical, and modified down dog. Push into the right big toe mound so that you feel the right calf activate. And then slide your left foot up towards the right wrist. Now we're going straight towards a pigeon-esque shape. So keeping that lateral edge grounded is perfectly good. If you landed with the foot grounded, just let the lateral edge work its way down. And then choices, right? We can stay in this elevated kingy pigeon-like shape. If it feels appropriate, you can work yourself down to your forearms. If it feels appropriate, you can work yourself down to your forehead. But none of the shapes are going to be right or wrong. Just think about taking this anterior space that you have on the right hip, and we're trying to transition the depth of that right hip into the lateral edge of your left hip now. And we'll give ourselves 15 more seconds on this first side. Thinking about settling into that right hip depth, right? We need that settle to get into that left hip. And then when you're ready, right toe mound comes back underneath you. We'll lift that right knee and slide the left foot back into traditional down dog. Now we have some real solid asymmetry. Eventually we find some balance. We'll come down to hands and knees and we'll slide back into child's pose. And again, we're finding the asymmetry in the hips, right? We've created it, then we're finding it. And from that kind of exploration in these two shapes, we bring ourselves back into somewhat balanced before we head to side two. And then when you're ready, we'll pull ourselves forward to hands and knees tabletop. The right foot stays pretty much where it is. We're not trying to angle that leg. Left leg crosses over and the toe mound connects. And then from this space, we roll back into the modified version of down dog, pressing into the big toe mound on that left foot so that you really capture the calf musculature. And then eventually, when you feel right, we're going to slide the right foot up towards that left wrist. And we're headed into pigeon side two. So you're finding your depth, right? Can be kickstand, can be forearms, can be forehead. But you're finding your depth, and then you're settling into the openness that you created in the front of the left hip this time to open up that space on the lateral edge of the right hip. Deep hip flexor space. Relaxing into the front of the left hip and allowing that newfound room in the system to manifest in the right. And we'll give ourselves 15 more seconds here. Side two. And eventually, when it feels right, when you feel balanced left to right, left toe mound comes underneath you. We slide the right foot back into down dog. Find your traditional positioning. Now, we should have taken a lot of the asymmetry out here, right? We should be pretty symmetrical, but really think about pressing back equally on both sides. And then once again, let's come to hands and knees. We'll flip the tops of the feet and settle into child's pose. Again, same thing. We should be relatively symmetrical here. So we're not as worried about left-right balance. We can just relax into the depth. Sure, we're making sure we're feeling even, but from the evenness, think about relaxing into the depth of the shape. And let's give ourselves just 15 more seconds to do that. And when you feel right, when you feel ready, we'll pull ourselves forward to hands and knees tabletop. And from hands and knees tabletop, toes curl, seat lifts, back to down dog. Let's walk to the front of the mat. Inhale to half lift. Exhale back to fold. And sweep yourself all the way up and overhead. Exhale the hands together at heart center. Think about activating the arches of the feet. We're headed back towards chair. Good glute squeeze. Good little engagement of the quads and the hamstrings. Just to check in, just like the last two, we rise right back up, sweep the arms up and overhead. Do a 3/4 fold here. So kind of like a 45-degree angle pointing away from you down towards the floor or mat, and then release all the way into the fold. And really pay attention to that deep lumbar, high sacral connection, how deep we can get into that space. And then eventually, let's slide our right foot straight back and behind us. And as the right foot lands, slide back into your left hamstring for some pyramid style legs. Pay attention to the anterior left hip here, just mostly for fatigue reasons. And then we'll bend that left knee and slide the right foot like halfway forward so that the right heel can ground. And then we're going to roll ourselves up. You can keep that front knee relatively bent. And then eventually we make it to this top space, an offset mountain. Keep the left leg so that it feels comfortable. If you felt a lot of fatigue in the anterior of the left hip in that pyramid, keep the knee bent so that you can use more quad musculature. If it felt perfectly okay, let's sweep the arms straight up with the leg relatively straight. So either knee bent or leg straight, depending on the hip. We'll half fold first. This is a reach and extension out into this space. And then all the way through the fold. Let the forehead come towards that inner shin. And then we'll slide the right foot forward. Inhale to half lift. And exhale to fold. Left foot slides all the way back. We slide back into the right hamstring. Little pyramid action here. Once again, taking some level of awareness to the anterior of the hip. Want to make sure that's not fatiguing. And that's just because of the work we had done previously. This would not typically be an anterior hip fatiguing shape. And then eventually we're going to slide that left foot halfway forward so the heel can ground. Roll ourselves up. And then make a determination on that front leg. What feels appropriate here? Once you have that front leg set, arm sweep. Little half fold for the spinal extension here. Really reaching into that length. And then we release. Forehead comes towards the right shin. We breathe into some depth. And then when you feel right, the left foot slides forward. Or in fold for a half lift. Exhale back down. Plant your hands, walk to down dog. And think about getting the hips far enough back that they challenge the hamstrings now. So really driving those hips back, taking full advantage of the hamstring length that you just offered. And then let's shift forward to plank. And we'll gently, delicately lower ourselves to our belly. And here we're just going straight to crocodile pose. Hands stacked underneath the forehead. And we're just letting the body relax from that pretty long sequence of challenge. And so most waking hours at the ashram are spent pruning and trimming and removing weeds and cutting away vines. There's some time before sunrise where there's a group meditation led by the leader of this ashram. And there's some time after sunrise, after sunset, where there's a group movement practice, some yoga, led again by the head of this ashram. All the while, she is constantly reminding the members of this community that if we don't keep working, the jungle will return. The chaos of the jungle is waiting on the edges of the ashram at all times, and to pause one day would mean the vines will creep in. And so every day they get up, they do their pre-sunrise meditation, they work all day, keeping their beautiful garden beautiful. They do their post-sunset practice and they go to bed. Last 15 seconds here. When you're right, when you're ready, hands slide back underneath the shoulders. Let's press ourselves up to hands and knees tabletop. From hands and knees tabletop, let's curl our toes, lift our seat, and find our way back in a down dog. That length, that space, that pressure, and the depth from the hand, finger mounds to the tailbone. And let's take our right leg and extend it straight back and behind us. So you get that three-legged dog. And then think about lifting the right heel towards the ceiling. And then we'll step that right foot forward into lunge. Ground our left heel. Think about dropping the left shoulder so that the left shoulder and the right shoulder are at equal height, using the hip space we've created, and then sweep straight up into warrior one. This should be a pretty wide open warrior one from the lower half of the body, right? The upper half of the body could still be pretty rigid, but think about settling into the hip space on the lower half of the body. And then let's take our arms out towards cactus. And reach the head straight up towards the ceiling as you squeeze the shoulder blades in towards one another. And then arms reach straight back up. Roll to warrior two. Make sure you're not collapsing in on that front leg. Stay strong towards that lateral expansion. Left heel spins up. We're back to crescent. Hands drop to the mat. The right foot's going to extend back into three-legged dog. Take it all the way to the ceiling. And then drop that right foot so it mirrors the left and sway your tailbone a little bit. Eventually coming back to neutral. Left leg extends straight back and behind you. Think about lifting that leg to the ceiling, then stepping our left foot forward. Right heel grounds. Think about the shoulders being equal height and finding that equality of the height on the shoulders from the hips, and then sweep up into warrior one. Again, thinking about the freedom we have in that hip space, and then doing what we can do with the torso. Eventually, arms open up towards cactus. We get to that cactus base, shoulder blades squeeze in towards the spinal column, towards one another, head reaches straight up. Arms reach straight back up. We roll to warrior two. The front leg here is really the default. It's so much room that it wants to collapse in, so keep that wide. Then the right heel spins up. We're back into crescent. Hands float back down to the mat. The left leg extends straight back and behind you, lifting towards the ceiling as you push all the way back. Then the left foot comes down to mirror the right. We'll walk our way forward to fold. Inhaling to half lift. Exhaling back to fold. Awareness drifts to the sacrum. Sweep or roll yourself all the way up. Exhaling the hands to heart center. Bring your seat back towards chair. Good depth. Good core activity. Splay those toes out. Feel the arches active. Sweep the hands forward and take as much chair depth as is available, noting that the quads may have some extra fatigue. Push back through those hamstrings. Find your way in forward fold. Settle into the fold first, then inhale, take the half lift. Get that extension, that last bit of length. Then exhale all the way back into fold. Let's sink our seat down towards our heels, towards Malasana. And from that Malasana-like shape, legs extend out in front of us. As the legs extend out, we just follow them with the torso into a fold. No pressure on the depth of this fold. Remember, the knees can bend. The spine can be encouraged towards neutral, or you can be in this big flexion shape. And let's give ourselves about 40 more seconds. So pretty good long hold here, kind of encapsulating what we've done. Last 15 seconds here. And when you're right, when you're ready, we walk ourselves back to vertical and take it all the way to horizontal. And maybe today in particular, we have a lot to appreciate as we settle here. Almost everything we did today was depth expanding in a pretty significant way. So let your body just be at ease here. One morning in the ashram, the focus shifts dramatically and pretty much instantaneously from manicuring the garden to nourishing and nurturing the head of the ashram. She's come down very ill, and the community is pretty worried that she's not going to pull through. And so they focus all of their effort, all of their energy on healing her. people spending hours researching in books, trying to find old Ayurvedic recipes that may be beneficial in the kitchen, working on those recipes, and everyone tending to her every possible need at all times. And it takes about 30 days, but she does recover. And when she does, and the intention drifts away from her and back to the English garden, everything is different. All of their beautiful manicured landscapes have been overrun with weeds and vines. Trees are starting to pop up from root runners. And this once perfectly immaculate place is overrun, and they are embarrassed for the leader of the ashram to see this. But she steps outside for the first time in a month, and she looks around, and they're all just shameful, and she says, "It's okay. If given the chance, the jungle will return." When you're right, when you're ready, let's bring our knees to a bent position if they're not already there. And then heel toe your feet together, your knees together, your thighs together. With an exhale, the bottoms of the feet come together, the knees fall out wide. With an inhale, the knees come back together. Exhale, knees fall towards the left. Inhale, the middle. Exhale to the right. Inhale to the middle. Exhale, bottoms of the feet come together, knees fall out wide. Inhale together. Exhale to the left. Inhale to the middle. Exhale to the right. Inhale to the middle. Exhale, bottoms of the feet come together, knees fall out wide. So we'll continue this just with our breath. Inhale, knees come together. Exhale to the left. Inhale to the middle. Exhale to the right. Inhale to the middle. Exhale, knees fall out wide. Continuing at your pace with your breath in a way that feels most beneficial. Again, exploring all the ranges of motion here. Eventually, about 6 months later, they get the ashram back to what it looked like before. But the woman who's headed this ashram for decades is no longer interested in the experience. And no one within the community is willing to step into her role. So they decide they're going to leave this place and they're going to go create a more standard village. And so they find this little village with maybe 2 or 3 homes. And they all move in. Hundreds of them move in, and they build hundreds of houses. And they have created, almost from nothing, this immaculately kept village. Everything is in balance and in harmony, and they take the principles of the ashram into society. Next time your knees fall open out wide, let's let them pause there. And we'll settle. And so with this near ashram level attentiveness, the collection of these 100+ villagers tend to the common property and tend to their yards and assist one another in their businesses and help one another out in exchanges. And this little village becomes kind of the place to live in the region. From people from outside of their general area start to move to this village because they hear how wonderful it is. And soon enough, there are 200 community members in this village, and now half of them are ex ashram members. Half of them have moved to the village because of its wonderful reputation and its beautiful societal existence. Last 15 seconds here with the knees out wide. And then we'll bring our knees back together. And then bring the heels out to hip height if they're not already there. And let's exhale and let both knees fall over towards the left. Settling into the space you've created. And so as less and less of the density of the population is ashram members, the ashram members begin to drift further and further apart. And as they drift apart, they stop sharing those communal duties of taking care of the communal properties. And they stop being as involved and supportive of one another's lives. And as more and more people move to town, they're less and less dependent upon one another. They're less and less involved with one another. And they're more and more individually withdrawn. When you're right, when you're ready, knees come back to neutral. And then we'll exhale the knees over to the second side, the right side. And as they pull away from the communal fabric, and they become more and more individuals and individually focused, they independently start noticing that they're less satisfied, not with their lives, not with their homes, not with their jobs, but with their village. They start noticing things that never existed before. Vandalism and trash and unkept common areas. And almost as if it's a hive mind or a collective breaking point, one day they all break. They decide that they can't do this anymore. And individually, when you're right, when you're ready, knees are going to return back to neutral. Kneecaps point towards the ceiling space. We let the awareness of our practice kind of drift through us and ask ourselves if there's any adjustments, movement, or needs we may have before Shavasana. If they are, we address those. And if there's not, we settle in to a place where we can appreciate some stillness. And so, almost as if they are thinking with a hive mind, one day they all break. And again, as if it's a hive mind, their break manifests almost the same way in each and every one of them. They go and individually, but collectively arrive at the old ashram leader's home. And she's stepping outside into her garden and she opens the front door and there's 100 people, all her old ashram members, just there. And they start to complain to her. And when it feels right for you, you're just finding that perfect level of stillness. So they go on and on complaining to her, telling her that this society they've moved to collectively has become just as bad as the societies they left when they found the ashram in the first place. And she goes around and she asks them, have you taken care of the town square? Have you visited all of the shops? And their answers are all no. We'll start to bring some movement to our fingers and our toes. And she looks around and she says, I've told you this 1,000 times, maybe 10,000 times. The jungle will return. We start to move our wrists, our ankles, and she can tell by the confused looks on everyone's face that they didn't capture the message. Movement into the shoulders and the hips. So she continues on and she says, society is just another form of nature. If you're not constantly tending to it, if you're not constantly involved with it, the jungle will return. The chaos will find a way. Movement into your head and your neck. Movement throughout the entirety of your body. And eventually that movement will travel through you so that you can transition from the shapes you are in back into a seat. Eventually finding the seat, spine gets tall, breath gets fluid. Eyes close. And we'll inhale our hands together at heart center. Over the course of the next 7 days, and maybe especially on throughout the next 14 months, can you be involved and engaged so the jungle can't return? And see how that impacts your experience. Thank you so much for being a part of tonight's practice and for being you. Namaste. Happy, beautiful Monday, guys. Appreciate the heck out of you. So glad that we got to move. We did some deep stuff tonight. That was a fun time. I'll be back on Sunday for a recharge. I hope you have an absolutely beautiful week. I love the heck out of you. Wow.